that meditation? Thank you, Arlene. That was really inspired. And really has the message of my whole talk in it, so I think, let's just wrap it up. So you stand and sing hymn number 9. It's great. So a surprised mother found her 4-year-old son crying as he was tying the laces of his shoes. And she looked at the little boy and she said, "Why are you crying?" He said, "Because I have to tie my shoes." And the mother said, "But you just learned how. Isn't that hard, is it?" "No," he wailed, "but I'm going to have to do it for the rest of my life." Have you ever felt that way? Sometimes if I look ahead, life can really seem overwhelming. All the things that I have to do, all the challenges that I have to face. And this can be especially so during this time of the year for some of us. Yes, the time of Advent, the very short 4 weeks before Christmas. Are you counting? Well, for those of you who might not know, as I said at the beginning of the service, the first Sunday of Advent represents hope. Certainly you would get that from the meditation. But what does this mean spiritually in our lives? Today I'm going to talk about one aspect of hope in our spiritual development. And that's the process of learning how to tear down the walls of doubt and build up that foundation of hope. The hope in that spiritual reassurance that I have all that I will ever need to meet the tasks that lie ahead, that meet the circumstances of my life. Sound like something you might be interested in this morning? This is going to drive me crazy. But it's okay. See? I'm overwhelmed by what lies ahead. But I can face it. Well, let me begin with the subject of how does one tear down the walls of doubt. Well, there are basically 2 forms of help that you and I need. And one is in a human form, let's say, and one is in a divine form, though we know there's no real separation. It's all one. But I'd like to do this just for the sake of getting a sense of how we show up in this physical realm. Our human selves and our God selves. So let's look at the human form first. Do you remember the old story of Androcles and the lion?
Yes.
Mommy, am I saying that right? Androcles? I forgot to check with you. Androcles and the lion.
Perfect.
In this story, a thorn was pulled from the lion's paw. Remember that? You see, Androcles was a slave and he had escaped his master and had run to find his freedom. And in doing this, he hid in a cave, and while in there, he heard a noise. He turned around and he saw he was being approached by a lion. He thought, this is worse than what I escaped from. You ever find yourself in this situation? Not exactly, but he just knew that he was going to be eaten, yes? That he had come to the end of the line. And he cowered back to the very, very end of the cave, and the lion growled. But then he noticed, what? A tear coming from the lion's eye. And the lion stuck out his paw. Now his paw was all swollen, and in the middle of his paw was a thorn. And Androcles withdrew the thorn carefully from the lion's paw, and the lion licked his face. And then he retreated. Androcles said, "Whew, right, I'm glad that's over." 3 years later in Rome, Androcles had become a Christian. And Roman persecutors seized him and ordered Androcles to renounce his faith, which he would not. And they told Androcles they were going to throw him into the lions. You know the story now? And guess which lion he faced? The lion he had helped 3 years earlier. And when the lion saw Androcles, he came out, and instead of eating him, he came up to him and licked his face. Androcles was not put to death, but was released because the Romans thought he was a person of high magic. You know, folks, this is our story. How many lions have you befriended on your pathway of life? How many thorns have you withdrawn from or plucked out of swollen paws? Are you aware that someday you're going to be thrown into the arena? You know, we all end up in the arena. Sometimes many, many times, yes? And do you know what saves us? Those times when we have helped others. The times that they've been at their worst, and we've been at our best. The times we have helped them pulling the thorns from their swollen paws. That's how it works. How many of you watched It's a Wonderful Life last night? I know, you can't help it, right? I didn't watch the whole thing. You know, but it's the same story. George found himself in the arena. In the arena of bankruptcy, potential ruin, worse yet, imprisonment, right? But all those swollen paws of all those townspeople in Bedford Falls that he had helped over his lifetime came to save him. You and I have been saved in the moment over and over and over again too, in the many arenas of our lives. Think about it. If you weren't saved, you wouldn't be here. It's been said that one seed makes a tree, and many trees make a forest. The addition of one drop of water at a time turns a stream into a river, and the river replenishes the sea. One step at a time is the way I make it through this journey that I call life. It's the way you make it through this journey we call life. As I think of what lies ahead, I can find hope and relief as I realize I'm not called upon to live a whole year in one day. Right? What does it mean to stay in the moment? My highest aspirations are reached one step at a time, one person at a time, helping me. That's the human part of the story. I'm not in this to be an individual. I'm in this life to be spiritually interdependent. Did you get that? Not independent. Spiritually interdependent. So I need other people to help me tear down the walls of doubt, and they need me in return. Do you believe that?
Yes, absolutely.
But I also need my divine self as well. Christ within, hope of glory, Arlene spoke about in the meditation. And this is where the divine form enters into this process. To really produce something that has the power to tear down the walls of doubt inside of me, I need help beyond my human expression. I even need help beyond the people who show up and are standing with me. I need divine help. Remember, even George in It's a Wonderful Life needed help. Didn't he have some divine intervention? Anybody remember who it was? Clarence. Yes, the angels. The angels will come and say, do not be afraid. And angels metaphysically represent what, my Bible class? Higher thoughts, the higher divine thoughts that are within us. Do not be afraid. And you and I have a divine self that is present with us in every arena of our lives. Everyone. As I speak to you this morning, I know that many of you have a lion right now approaching you in a cave. And there's no way where to go. You can't go forward. You can't go back any farther. Your back is up against the wall. You pause and the human shouts inside of you, I'm afraid. You may even be surrounded by good friends who are saying, you can do this. You're going to make it. But it's not until you feel the presence of your God self, of God, do you know, really know, that it's going to be all right, that you can do it. And this knowing brings you wonderful joy, wonderful relief. This is the story. Now, does it sound like a fable? Like a Hollywood movie to some of you? The stuff of fantasy, you might say? That's not my story, BJ. As many of you know, I just spent the last couple of months teaching Bible metaphysics. It was a lot of fun, I hope. For me, anyway. You'll have to ask the class. I was teaching specifically the interpretation of the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, as we call it now. And I can tell you with absolute assurance, folks, that the stories in the Bible, most fables, and many, many Hollywood movies are our story. They're my story and they're your story. The story, these are archetypal stories. They're the stories of our spiritual development. Our stories of moving from doubt to hope to victory. Now, I had some leftover homework from my last class, a bunch of definitions, metaphysical definitions that I had to look up and bring into the class in January. And in my studies, I came upon a story that relates to this talk today. Now, is it the Christmas story? No, it's not the angel, coming in the New Testament. But this story relates to the development, the spiritual development of hope. So I want to share it with you this morning. This is a story some of you know from the book of Joshua. In the Old Testament, chapter 6, verses 1 through 17 and 20. You know the one I'm going to tell you? It's a story about tearing down the walls where? Jericho. Yes, at Jericho. It has great truth for us today there. And it has a Bible principle inside of it. Now, remember, whenever I read to you from the Bible, it's important to remember that you are the characters in the story. That this story is about you. Not some ancient civilization thousands and thousands of years ago. Great truth can come from this as we realize that right now this is a story about my life and about yours. So let me read you the first line. Now the city of Jericho was shut up inside and out because of the Israelites. No one came out and no one went in. Folks, this is talking about you. It's talking about me. It's talking about me when I'm filled with fear. When I have fear, I shut myself up and I put a wall around my mind. And at this point, even if somebody came along who said something very positive to me, what's going to happen? I'm not going to hear it. I'm going to shut it out. I'm going to repel that thought. All of my thoughts are shut up inside of myself. And all I can do is think within myself about my worry, about my fear, about my problems and my concerns. I have to tear down that wall, but I need help doing it. Yes? This is what the story is all about. The Lord said to Joshua, by the way, Joshua is our name too. It means whom Jehovah makes triumphant. Who's Jehovah? Jehovah is the Lord. What's the Lord? The Lord is I am that I am. You are the I am, that God self. So, Joshua means whom Jehovah makes triumphant. When God comes through me and as me, it makes me triumphant. Yes? The Lord said to Joshua, see, I have handed Jericho over to you, along with its king and soldiers. So what's Jericho? Jericho is the city just over the Jordan in the land of Canaan. And it was the first city that the Israelites destroyed when they first entered into the promised land. Again, let me think about my own spiritual journey. Each one of us is on this journey. And that journey, folks, is taking us to the promised land. And what is the promised land? Christ consciousness, happiness. It's a state of Christ consciousness. That's promised, the promised land. What it means spiritually is spiritual realization, the promised land. To fully know once and for all who and what I really am. What did we hear in the meditation? Who are you?
God.
Yeah. Your God self, the Christ. God in expression. As Paul so eloquently wrote. What is it? Do you know the scripture by now? Arlene and I have said it. Christ in you.
The hope of glory.
Thank you. The hope of glory. Think about it. When I came to that point inside of myself, when I come to that point inside of myself, when I can get past all of the external stuff and get to that point of complete spiritual realization, then I will know in every arena of my life, arena, not area, every challenge of my life, every situation when I'm facing the lion, that all is well. All is well. Now the word Jericho means moon reflecting. And this is a fascinating word. And a fascinating thing. What is the moon? If we look up tonight and see the moon, what is that?
Light in the darkness.
Light in the darkness. But where does that light come from? As we look at the moon, it does not shine of its own light. Anybody know what it is? It's reflected light from what?
The sun.
The sun. And what does this have to do with you and me, you might ask? This is talking about the intellect inside myself. The intellect seems to express the light of understanding, yes? But spiritual understanding reveals that it shines, the intellect shines by what? Reflected light. Even as the moon is a part of our planetary system, the intellect is a part of our body, has a legitimate place within us, but it becomes a problem when the intellect thinks it originates its own light. I'm not talking about being egotistical like, oh, I'm so beautiful. I'm talking about being egotistical by saying, I know what I think, and I act because I think, and I'm going to deal with this problem in the arena or in the cave all by my little old self. All the time it's like staring at the moon, expecting to get a suntan.
Very good. I like that.
You know, I have to learn that my intellect is reflected light from what? From the wisdom, the intellect. The intellect, the moon is reflected light from the sun. But what is the intellect reflected light from? God mind. The wisdom of God mind. When the little I stops thinking of myself as the know-all and end-all and turns to my God self, then the walls are torn down inside of me. Then I have the hope, faith, and power to do what I need to do in my life. So back to the story. I'm going to read you a little bit of a long section right now, so breathe. Oh my gosh. Maybe I shouldn't. Go ahead. You want to hear it?
Yeah.
Well,
Please.
I don't know. Not all of you love the Bible.
Please.
Okay, here we go.
Please.
So try to stay awake. You have to get up and take a bath and break to it. We're adults. You shall march around the city, all the warriors circling the city once. Thus you shall do for 6 days. With 7 priests bearing 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark. On the 7th day you shall march around the city 7 times, the priests blowing the trumpets. When they make a long blast with the ram's horn, as soon as you hear the sound of the trumpet, then all the people shall shout with a great shout, and the wall of the city will fall down flat, and all the people shall charge straight ahead. So Joshua, son of Nun, summoned the priests and said to them, take up the ark of the covenant and have 7 priests carrying 7 trumpets of ram's horns in front of the ark of the Lord. To the people he said, go forward and march around the city. Have the armed men pass on before the ark of the Lord. And as Joshua had commanded the people, the 7 priests carrying the 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the Lord went forward, blowing the trumpets, and the ark of the covenant of the Lord following them. You okay?
Yes.
And the armed men went before the priests who blew the trumpets. And the rear guard came after the ark while the trumpets blew continually. And to the people of Joshua gave this command, you shall not shout or let your voice be heard, nor shall you utter a word until the day I tell you to shout. Then you shall shout. So the ark of the Lord went around the city, circling at once, and they came into the camp and spent the night in the camp. And then Joshua rose early in the morning, and the priests took up the ark of the Lord, the 7 priests carrying the 7 trumpets of ram's horns. Now, why did I just read you so much of the story at once? Any ideas? What's a number you heard over and over and over again? 7. You know, it's talked about throughout the Bible, the number 7, and it has real significance for you and me. Because it tells us about a Bible principle that's going to help us tear down the walls inside of us. The number 7 in the Bible refers to the divine law of perfection in the divine natural human. So breathe. It represents the divine number of perfection in the divine natural human. So if you go into many traditional churches, folks, you're going to see 7 candles on the altar. They represent 7 lamps, or the 7 centers in the body. It was that way all the way back in biblical times. In times of old, the tabernacle represented the body of the human being, and the 7 lamps were a symbol of the 7 centers in the organism through which intelligence is expressed. Isn't that cool? So what are these 7 centers? I mean, we know we have the 7 chakras. But spiritually speaking, what they're referring to in the 7 centers are your 5 senses: seeing, hearing, tasting, touching, what am I forgetting? Smelling. And then the other 2 are intuition and the wisdom of God mind. These are the areas to be developed inside of you, inside of the human, but spiritualized, folks. These are the ways to develop yourself as a divine expression in your human tabernacle, your human temple. We read about going around the city 7 times. This is to enter every one of my centers, to pray so much that I see only good, to pray so much that I hear only good, to pray so much that I literally smell only the good of God, to pray so much that I only feel the good of God, to pray so much that I only taste the good of God. Over and over and over, I have to circle that city, which I'll talk to you about in a minute. This is talking about a spiritual completion inside of me. It's talking about becoming so aware of the presence of God that I literally tear down any wall of doubt that may be there. And I do not have to use any physical force to tear down these walls. Just like in the story, what happened? They came tumbling down all by themselves, and your walls will come down in the same way. The walls I have inside of me now will not be able to stand up when I totally surrender my human senses to the expression of my God self. Let me finish the story now. It's very short. The 7 priests carrying the 7 trumpets and ram's horns before the ark of the Lord passed on, blowing these trumpets continually. The armed men went before them, and the rear guard came after the ark of the Lord, while the trumpets blew continually. And on the 2nd day, they marched around the city once, and then returned to the camp. They did this for 6 days, and then on the 7th day, they rose early at dawn and marched around the city in the same manner 7 times. And it was only on that day that they marched around the city 7 times, and at the 7th time, when the priests had blown the trumpets, Joshua said to the people, "Shout, for the Lord has given you the city." And the city, metaphysically speaking, as I said, listen up, Bible students, this was one we couldn't answer the other day, right? Is a gathering together of thoughts. You can call them people thoughts, or thought people. Even my fears and my worries, you're now listening to my higher self with this circling around the city. I marched around my city of thoughts so much that everyone is listening. All my senses come together and shout, and the walls inside of me come what? Tumbling down. And the city and all that is in it shall be devoted to the Lord. So the people shouted, and the trumpets were blown, and as soon as the people heard the sound of the trumpets, they raised a great shout, and the wall fell down flat. So the people charged straight ahead into the city and captured it. This is my story. It's your story. On this first Sunday of Advent, we can turn our doubts about what lies ahead into absolute hope and faith that all will be well in every arena and area of our lives. So let's stand and join together in singing hymn number, I think it's 27.